Experienced by few, witnessed by many. How can you create something that, not a ton of people get to experience so that it's meaningful for them, but then use content and use social media and use these distribution channels where everyone can see that magic?
What would you say is your marketing philosophy?
You don't have a brand if you only market online. People need to be able to experience it and touch it and feel it and interact with it in the real world.
Philip, do you have any comparisons that you can draw, for example, in your experience when you worked at Google and now Shinola is more of a product-focused company?
You spend enough time working on different brands and you kind of realize that all brands are trying to do is connect to people. There's an audience we're going after. How do we connect to them in a way that they understand? We're not selling watches, we're selling memories.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. My name is Andres Figueira and I'm going to be your host for the day. This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Company, helping fast-growing teams hire exceptional remote talent from Argentina, South Africa, and beyond. We connect companies with world-class professionals who bring skill, reliability, and a global perspective to every role. And just for our listeners, we're offering an exclusive 10% discount on your first hire. All you need to do is click Start Hiring when you visit globaltalent.co and mention the podcast listener discount when we get in touch. And today, with me here, I am speaking with Filip Perkovic, Director of Brand and Partnerships, or well, better said, former Director of Brand and Partnerships of Shinola, which is a brand that is and has an unwavering commitment to crafting lasting products from watches to leather goods and even a hotel. So with that said, Filip, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, man. I'm excited for this chat.
Yeah, no, we're also very happy that we were able to make this work and have you on. And just so that we can get the audience a bit more in context, Filip, would you be able to tell us a bit about your background, what you're doing? I know that you're the former director of brand at Shinola, so how your experience was there, and maybe tell us a bit more about your story.
Yeah, no, thank you. So background is super kind of unconventional. Kind of fell into marketing. And I think a lot of it kind of starts just from, my childhood, like indirectly. So my parents are immigrants from Yugoslavia and they came to, America, ended up in Michigan. And yeah, I think, so much of my life was spent kind of trying to assimilate into culture, right? American culture that, indirectly I was like studying culture kind of my whole life, right? Like what are kids wearing? What are kids eating? Because my parents didn't know, right, when they came here. So, I'm paying more attention to kind of like consumerism and culture and music and fashion and food and all this stuff. And that kind of shaped, my childhood. So then as I got older, went to college, I studied economics, and just started getting into marketing. Like, this is around the time when social media was like starting to become a thing, MySpace and Twitter and Facebook, and, was understanding like how to kind of use these tools early on. And, ended up getting a job at an agency, out of college. And I was just doing social media strategy, just like, hey, here's cool things I'm seeing in the world. Here's how these brands can use it. And really started to kind of hone in on like, how kind of agencies work and how brands work and how marketing works. And then from there, I moved to San Francisco for a couple years. Then I moved to New York for a couple years. And then I moved back to San Francisco to work at Google. So I was on the brand experience team there doing kind of internal marketing for Google. So basically all the ways people can experience the brand that aren't traditional kind of touch points. How do you bring Google to life? And then from there, I moved back to Michigan and became the first head of brand at Shinola.
Wow, that is one hell of a journey, man. And I must say, I identify a lot with your story because I am originally from Venezuela, but I went with my parents who my dad moved due to jobs and the work he did. We moved to England, to Ecuador. I lived in the States for a while. So I totally get what you mean that you spent all your life like trying to understand the culture just to be a part of it because that's what you were living as a young man.
Right.
And
And it's
like
funny
I'm
because,
like a third culture kid as well.
and I didn't really make this connection until like, honestly, like a couple years ago, but you spend enough time, working on different brands and you kind of realize like all brands are trying to do is connect to people, right? Like there's an audience we're going after. How do we connect to them in a way that they understand? And so much of that is, is in translation, right? How do you translate this audience pain points to, what the brand is providing? And, Yeah, it's just like when you've been doing it for so long for your own personal life, like, it becomes a second nature thing of just like, there's just like innate, like, there's these innate kind of hunches that you have around things that are gonna work just because you understand people and culture and society better.
But Philip, with all the experience that you've gathered working at Google, at Shinola, at every place that you mentioned, what would you say is your marketing philosophy or your way that you approach branding for a company?
I have a couple rules that I kinda just always keep in the back of my head. The first rule is you don't have a brand if you only market online. And I say that with the sense of like, if you wanna have a brand, people need to be able to experience it and touch it and feel it and interact with it in the real world. I always say that like, people aren't like taking screenshots of your banner ads and sharing them with their friends, right? So it's like, what are the things that you're doing that give people a chance to experience what the brand has to offer? And so that's one thing. I think it's super important for brands to kind of have, to take space and have things that people can engage with in the real world, right? Whether that's events, activations, partnerships, in like anything that people can actually engage with. I think that's super important because it just, the bonds become deeper, right? So it's like, when we were at Google, there's a saying that my boss taught me. He was like, experienced by few, witnessed by many, right? So how can you create something that, not a ton of people get to experience so that it's meaningful for them, but then use content and use social media and use these distribution channels where everyone can see that magic, right? So it's like you can that thing can be witnessed by so many people. So it's kind of like a 2 for 1, right? So that's one thing for me, that I believe in. And then, I just, end of the day, like it comes down to just storytelling, right? Like what are the stories you're
Of course.
telling? How are you telling them? How are you, kind of championing the right communities and people, with the brand and how do those things kind of play into what you're doing, right? Like we always said at Shinola, like, we're not selling watches, we're selling memories, right? And it sounds a little corny, but like after I started, working there, so I never owned a watch before I started working at Shinola, right? Um, but after I started working there, I spent a lot of time, my first like month or two, like I was going to all the different stores, talking to customers, trying to really immerse myself in like what makes this brand special. And what I found was like there's so many people that had kind of like a Shinola story, right? So you meet this guy and he's like, "Oh yeah, like I bought my first Shinola when I got my first raise at work and I wanted to celebrate it." Or it's like, "My wife got this for me when we got married," or "My dad got me this watch after I graduated college." And those memories are associated with the product now, right? And with the brand. And I found that so many people kinda had a story like that, right? Because it's like, it's not an insignificant purchase. Like, we're asking people to spend 1,000 to $4,000 on a product, on a watch, on a bag.
Mhm.
So, those purchases, like, they're all rooted in this kind of, like, notion of, like, I want this to be associated with this memory, right? So, that was a very powerful thing for us to try to kind of tell stories around and unlock, and at the time, when we started to like explore this, the brand really didn't do any kind of lifestyle kind of deep storytelling. It was all just, here's the product, here's the factory, right? Here's how we make it, made in America, made in Detroit. Here's what it looks like, and it's like beautiful, right? So, it was the first time for us to kind of lean into some of these things where it's like, no, like let's go a step deeper and like, figure out how we can actually tell the emotional side of the brand. And the product's the conduit to that, right? It's the thing that people like remember, right? And this is the thing that people engage with. But everyone, that I talked to kind of had this story of like, oh, I'm using this brand's product to remember something. And that was such a powerful unlock for us.
Wow, I love that. And it is so true. Like you just mentioned it right now, but I hadn't actually made the connection. In the fact that, yeah, watches and that type of products that I believe Shinola sells are very tied to these important moments in life, these milestones that you reach, and then you get this gift or you buy it just for yourself. But it's so cool that you're able to make the brand more humane by
Mhm,
portraying these
mhm.
stories that the customers say, because it does add another layer to it. Because when you mention branding and how everything is about storytelling, I also believe very strongly that it's also a part of like creating a world for the brand that's not just the name, the product, and the ads that you see, but it's, yeah, Shinola can be with you for all your life in these different steps or whatever brand it may be, but it's portraying
Right.
them yourself and your company as what's it called? Like a companion for the customer during their life
Yeah,
or
yeah.
providing these events. And in terms of what the work you did at Shinola, Philip, how big is the company and how many people did you have helping you out as director of brand?
When you factor in, like, retail, the hotel, we're probably, like, 350 people, across, like, 21 stores, HQ, the factory, and then the marketing team. So I overlooked the marketing team and then indirect, like, and then linear with the creative team. So the creative team was probably 7 people, marketing team was probably another 8 people. There was a ton of things that we had to do just to kind of, like, like, keep the lights on, right? Like, email was a big part of our business. We, updating and managing the website, there's so many SKUs, product drops, like, that was a big part of the business, the e-com side. Um
Okay.
and then the retail side too, right? I worked really closely with the retail team because as we started to kind of, transform the brand with storytelling and with, photography and videos, we had to make sure that, like, you were getting kind of that same experience on the retail side too, right? So it's like, you know, little things like going into the store and, like, all the watches have to be on the correct time, right? If we're selling watches and one watch is not right, like, we literally had someone would come in, like, in the morning when we're putting product out and making sure all the watches are ticking correctly at the right time. And, like, all those little things kind of matter, right? Because again, we're asking someone to make, a $1,000 to $4,000 purchase. So we got to make sure that experience is the way that we want it to be. Um, so yeah, there's just so many kind of different touch points with, how the ecosystem in the world of Shinola was kind of operating. And then you have the hotel too, which is like, a lot of times people's kind of first interaction with the brand, right? People come to Detroit, they're staying at the hotel. They might not necessarily know that we sell watches. They just think it's a hotel. So it's like, how do you use that platform and that, that actual structure to kind of story tell even deeper and connect people to the brand? So we created a program where if you were staying at the hotel, it was kind of a lending program where you could, call down to the front desk and say, "Hey, I have a dinner, I have a business meeting," and we would send someone up with watches that you could just pick one out and wear it for your dinner and then return it when you were done. Yeah, giving people a way to experience the brand where it's like, "Hey, like, I didn't know you guys sold watches. Cool." Someone comes up to your room. There's like, our leather watch boxes. They open it up. There's 10 watches in there. You get to, pick one. Obviously, like, you have to kind of fill out a waiver and everything, but like, you pick the watch out, you wear it to your dinner, wear it to your event, come back to the hotel, boom, 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 leave it in your room. We leave you with a little watch box. And then and also times, a lot of times too, people were just like, actually, I just want to buy it. So like, you have that
I
thing where
love
it's like, cool. Yeah. So it's just, again, like, using all the different touch points, like you said, building this world where it's like, there's so many ways that, people can engage with the brand. And, a lot of my work was in how can you kind of elevate these touch points, right? Make them a little more personable. Like, we noticed, 70% of the people who are staying at the hotel never purchased a product before. It's like, oh, that to me, that was like a moment where it's like, all right, how can we get these people to engage with the brand a little deeper? And it's like, all right, let them wear the product. Like, if they're staying at a nice hotel, like, let them take test wear a bag, let them test wear a watch. And those are kind of like the little things that, you know, seem easy, but like logistically and operationally, like, it's a lot to kind of implement just given how big the ecosystem is.
Of course.
But those are the projects, that not only drive, loyalty and an awareness and engagement, but also drives bottom line P&L, right? Like, we just created another sales channel, right? Every single day there's 120, I think 127 rooms at the hotel. Every single day there are 127 people checking in, right? So it's like, these are 127 customers that you can engage with every single day, whom, like I said, 70% didn't know the brand or haven't purchased from the brand. So, those are the kinds of things for us where it's like, how do we take what we have and use that as kind of as the baseline, right? Because, as big as the brand is, like, we're still relatively small compared to the watch industry, right? Like, the watch
Of course.
industry is a $6 billion industry, right? Um,
Hmm.
and we're just a very small fraction of that. So there's still so much room for us to grow in kind of these, in these industry in like in these verticals.
No, no, I get that. And I love how you're placing like Shinola. I feel it is like a premium brand because selling watches is always a bit more of like a high standard market. And I felt as if you were going out to try out a Lamborghini. You're not going to buy it without doing a test drive before and having that cycle done in like the hotel, just allowing them to wear it and live it for a while. It's like the best
Yeah.
experience you could provide for somebody who doesn't even know they want a watch or they don't even wear a watch until they do. And then they feel a lot more
Mhm.
formal, a lot more elegant. It's this whole thing with
Right.
confidence that it makes you feel. Because I get it. I get it. That is so cool, man. And Philip, do you have any comparisons that you can draw, for example, in your experience when you worked at Google, that you also worked in branding there versus Shinola? Because like Google is a software, it's like it's a service, I feel like, and now Shinola is more of a product focused company. So what comparisons do you have in the difference for branding for those?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great question. So the best way I can explain it is that, at Google, we had a different problem, right? So most kind of, any product CPG, anyone that sells something, their biggest thing is we need more people to know about us, right? We need more customers. We need to know about us. At Google, it was the opposite problem, right? Everyone knows Google, right? Everyone uses it every day, but because it's so kind of like consistent in your life, you almost take it for granted, right? So the challenge is like, how do we get people to care about this thing that's like always accessible, that's always on? Like, you use Google to kind of do everything, right? Find food, find whatever,
Of
search for
course.
things.
It's your
So
homepage on the browser. It's like the
yeah,
first thing
yeah,
you'll see is Google.
and because it's so accessible and so easy and it works well all the time, you kind of take it for granted, right? That's just kind of the nature of utility, right? The more you use something, the less kind of, the less magical it becomes because it's just consistent, right? So for us, the problem was, how do we get people to we always talked about like how do you get people to understand and feel the magic of Google, right? So a lot of the work that we did, there was, this was also during 2020, so during the pandemic. So a lot of the work had to kind of shift towards to video and production. So, instead of, Google to try to find a restaurant, we would do stuff with like different comedians. And it's like, all right, cool. Take us to your favorite spot. And let's show you how Google can optimize, what you're looking for, right? Like if you're a picky eater
Good.
and you only want to find like, one or two specific things. So it's like, all right, cool. How can you use content to tell a story around that? But the focus becomes the person and their kind of preferences, not the platform, right? The platform is
Okay.
always the sidekick. It's always the reliable thing that's gonna get you to the solution. But the story wasn't about Google Maps. The story was about this person, right? And like what they were trying to like accomplish. So again, it's all just about perspective and like, what is the narrative that you're telling? Um, but also too, like remembering that like there's a time and place for both, right? Like just as much as we did that, we still focused on, telling product stories. And it's like, all right, cool. Here's how this thing works, right? Very like,
Of course.
layman terms. Here's the new features, here's the new thing, here's how it works. Um, but I think a lot of it for us was just like, again, trying to find those deeper kind of emotional connections of like, how do you get people to kind of care about something? And you do that through relatability. You do that through kind of, humanity, and kind of lived experiences, things that people can like, oh, you know what? Like I do, one of my friends is a picky eater. I understand this problem. I've been through it. Here's how this thing can help. Right.
I imagine it must be difficult with something as big as Google, and as you mentioned, that it's something that people take for granted. It's just their opening landing page when they open a browser, and it feels like it's something that exists but isn't alive. Is just gonna always be there, and trying to get people to feel more humane to more towards the brand, telling these stories is some way like to captivate the audience and show them the million other ways you can use Google instead of just like search are and looking for a question you have. And now another question I do have, Philip, is in your experience at Shinola, did you guys leverage AI in any peculiar or interesting way? Seeing that you're in an industry like that, you're a company that does watches and more like product for the consumer. Like, what leverage? What ways did you use AI, if you did at all? That could be interesting and you could tell us about.
Yeah, so not a ton, the brand, is kinda rooted in this, like, tactable, like, we're a craft brand, right? We make things, right? Like, the watches are all assembled in Detroit by hand, and, a lot of the way the brand operates, from kind of the product point of view is still pretty old school, right? So, like, every watch is our watch designers are some of the most talented people in the world, and every new watch starts with a notebook sketch. Like, every single watch starts hand, pen to paper, sketching ideas first, playing with it, toying with it, going through that process, and then after something feels good, then we'll go into kind of the digital version and, CAD it out and, like, do all those things. Whereas, majority of the industry starts with the computer, right? Like, a lot of designers now are digital designers. Our designers are still old school, and it's still like, what is the human kind of touch? And, you come to HQ, and, like, where our designers sit, there's just, like, huge foam core boards of just, like, sketches everywhere, right? They just kinda live in this, like, chaos of just, like, every single you can kinda see, like, like, "Oh, this watch, here's the first sketch, the first idea of it, and here's what it actually became, and here's the first iteration." So, um yeah, I mean, it's a very analog brand, right? Like, it's a very analog, it's a very kind of, old school, um, so, yeah, we didn't really engage with AI in that level, and even on the marketing side too, like, everything was still kind of, we just didn't find the need to kinda incorporate some of these tools, and, as the tools get better and, things kinda change, yeah, maybe down the road, but yeah, while I was there, we didn't really engage with a ton of the tools.
Philip, now talking more about the future, I know that you're the former director of brand for Shinola, but what are your plans for this year and what do you want to accomplish, man?
Yeah, I mean, I think on a personal level, it's just like the older you get, the more you just wanna, like, be a good person, be there for your friends, be there for your family, and, just, like, try to kind of enjoy, and be more present. And then on a professional level, like I said, I think for me, it's just about people, right? Like, I wanna you do this long enough, and you kinda realize that, like, to do to do great work, you have to be around great people, right? Like,
Of
everyone
course.
needs to kinda lift each other up because, like, you there's gonna be days where, we're human, like, you're not gonna be on your game, and you're gonna need your team to kinda support you and vice versa, right? You're gonna need
Mm-hmm.
be there for that. So, I think for me, it's just like the older I get too, it's just like, I just wanna work with good people who care, who about what they're doing, who kind of, push me, push each other, um, and who don't really kind of take no for an answer, right? Like, I always tell people, like, getting an idea made is one of the hardest things in the world, right? Going live with content, going live with a campaign, like, unless you've done it's very, very difficult to do. Um, there's just so many variables that, can kinda go wrong, right? Like, so when you're in the trenches like that, like, you just wanna be with people who also care and who also, like, are there for the right reasons, who wanna push the work. So, those are the things that I'm kinda looking forward to.
I get that. No, I totally get that. And being and making sure that you're surrounded by the right people is so important. And also the fact that they elevate you to do your best work. And if you're not in the headspace to do your best work, then you at least are able to trust them enough to delegate what you are not able to do at the moment and know that it's still going to be done well. Because that is like one of the most important reasons I feel that teams don't work out is because the they don't have enough trust to properly work with each other. And it just turns into something so individual that then why are you even on a
Right.
team, man?
Right,
But
right,
totally
right.
get that. Totally get that.
Yeah.
And Philip, noticing that we're almost at time, so I'm
Mhm.
gonna close out the episode. But before I do, I just wanted to say, man, thank you so much for hopping on here with us, for telling us your story, your insights, and everything you've learned with your experience around the years, man. It really has been so cool working from Google to Shinola. It's companies so different, but that provide so much
Right, right.
experience. We really appreciate you being able to come and tell us your story, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It was a great, great, great time.
No problem at all. It really has been a pleasure and it was a great time. And to anybody here who is listening to us, we really appreciate you as well being on the show, listening to the different personalities that we bring on and all the different industries that we're talking to. So, with that said, thank you so much and have a good one.